Tess Walch from Market Check. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Now, Tess, look, we often talk about the grains industry, but there's so much happening in canola. We might start off there this week, a hot market getting even hotter.
That's right. So we sort of came into 2022 with the global oilseed complex quite tight, so balance sheets for all the different variations of oilseeds. Historically very, very tight, so the market was very strong. And then this week, a report has come out of Canada showing farmer planting intentions, and the Canadian farmer is intending to plant less canola this year than last year. It's been reduced by about 7%, which is quite interesting given how high prices are. But we can probably attribute this to the high cost of fertiliser and the availability of fertiliser. But that's sort of, been happening in one area.
Yeah, just before you leave that one, have we seen any indicators of what Australian farmers have been planning to plant, or are we waiting for ABARES on that?
We're sort of waiting. Anecdotally, though, people who typically can plant canola, we've had a really good start for most areas of the country in terms of timing of rains to plant canola. So I think the forecast for the Australian canola crop is large. We're sort of, I think the number is around 6 million tonnes, which is a huge crop if it pulls off. But we need to get to the end of the season.
All right, I pulled you back to Australia there. You were going to go somewhere else in the world and tell us what else is driving canola.
Yes, I was going to go to Indonesia. News last Friday, which really rocked the market, was that Indonesia has pulled the pin on temporarily on palm oil exports. So, internally there, they've been exporting so much because of the high pricing, and they've had to pull the pin to preserve, internal stock levels. So I think another article this morning was sort of discussing that it should only last around a month, this sort of temporary ban. But what it's done to the futures markets is incredible.
Right, that's interesting, because what I picked up is, yes, they were going to come back onto market fairly quickly because they're very export-oriented and don't have much by way of storage, but why is that feeding into the futures market? I gather that it's a bit like saying we didn't know they were capable of catching that kind of cold, and now we know it. We might have to factor that in future estimates. Is it a bit like that?
Yeah.
Yep. So that's canola, that's upside, I guess. Are we already seeing that on the pricing front for farmers on canola, or are we just expecting maybe in the future that's going to go that way?
No, we have seen prices lift pretty aggressively this week. New crop pricing sort of around $1,100 port for most ports. But we would say that though that pricing is quite cheap relative to world futures markets currently, and that ties back to what we were talking about earlier about Australia at the moment is seemingly very well set up for a very big canola crop. So our cash pricing is indicating is reflecting that.
Now, you mentioned the Canadians were a bit sheepish about their canola on the fertiliser front. Are we the same?
We'll know by the end of the season how it's played out, but anecdotally, people won't be able to apply as much as fertiliser during the season as they would like, just due to price and availability. So we will likely see an impact on final yield as a result. But it's a bit hard to predict that from here.
It's been a common theme across the last year or so that canola's been the pretty girl at the dance, but wheat still chugging along reasonably nicely. What are we seeing on the wheat market?
Yeah, so just in the last couple of days, there probably hasn't really been a lot of news specific to wheat, but with this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, continuing, we're just seeing just an incredibly elevated global market, futures and cash markets alike. And the longer that conflict goes on, the more likely we're going to see these high prices here to stay.
All right, well, we'll be watching with bated breath when it comes to these what farmers are actually planting this year and see how hard we've gone into canola. Tess, thanks for updating us on what the markets are doing this week.
Thanks, Ricky.